The HOA leader literally contacted law enforcement about me using my personal backyard lake for swimming, a body of water I'd been the owner of for 15 years before her housing development was even conceived. Imagine the scene. I'm relaxing in the water of my privately owned lake as the sun sets, observing the loons making their calls over the surface when abruptly, the wail of police sirens interrupts the peaceful evening sounds of crickets in a jarring way. Deputy Martinez from the sheriff's department arrives up my gravel drive, appearing just as bewildered as I was feeling. "I apologize, sir, but I'm required to give you this citation based on an HOA complaint," he states, struggling to maintain his composure. Standing at the edge of my property behind him is Karen Whitmore, her arms folded and wearing that fake smile that fails to reach her icy blue eyes. The written citation demanded a $1,000 penalty for unapproved leisure water activities within a prohibited area. There I stand, water still dripping from my body, staring at this document in disbelief. "This lake belongs to me, ma'am. I constructed this dock myself back when you were still residing in California. How would you respond if somebody attempted to regulate water on land you owned? Leave a comment and let me know your location. I'm sure you have your own HOA horror tales too." Karen had no idea I'd worked 2 decades as a director of municipal finances. That was a significant error on her part. Allow me to rewind and explain how I found myself in this situation. I go by Garrett, and 3 years back, cancer took my wife Sarah from me. Our marriage had lasted 22 years, and her loss felt like half of my spirit had been violently torn away. The sorrow was overwhelming. You understand that sensation when breathing becomes difficult, thinking clearly is impossible, and envisioning a future without that person seems unimaginable. My response was what any devastated widower might do. I relocated to an extremely remote area. Actually, not quite nowhere. I came into possession of my grandfather's 4-acre estate in the North Carolina countryside, which included a spring-fed lake that our family had owned since 1952. My grandfather constructed the initial cabin using his own labor after returning from the Korean War, and that lake restored his mental well-being just as it was about to restore mine. Visualize this location. Water so clear it's like glass, fed by underground springs, encircled by tall pines with that Christmas morning fragrance. At every sunrise, loons would call over the water surface while fog rose like spectral figures performing a dance. I'd position myself on the dock my grandfather constructed, drinking coffee from Sarah's beloved mug, the one with the broken handle she insisted on keeping, observing rainbow trout jumping to catch bugs. The quietness provided healing. No vehicle noise, no time pressures, simply the soft sound of wind moving through tree branches and the sporadic splash of a fish leaping. My 20 years working as Millbrook County's municipal finance director, examining budgets, and exposing dishonest contractors who believed they could sneak inflated bills past the city, had taught me that most governmental harassment originates from obscure regulations that nobody challenges. This knowledge would become extremely valuable when confronting petty dictators like Karen. Following Sarah's death, however, I took early retirement. The lake transformed into my refuge, my healing space, my motivation to rise each day. Then Karen Whitmore entered the picture, like a destructive storm wearing expensive footwear and insisting on speaking with the manager of Mother Nature herself. During 2019, a developer purchased the old logging road adjacent to my northern fence. Almost immediately, bulldozers started removing century-old oak trees, and chainsaw sounds replaced my tranquil mornings. Diesel fumes and the scent of freshly cut wood began floating across my land like an industrial contamination, blending with the pine aroma until it resembled a hardware store explosion in a woodland setting. In under 2 years, 47 oversized homes appeared like fungi following rainfall. They marketed it as lakeside luxury estates, which was amusing since their sole lake perspective was viewing my property. Yet nothing screams luxury quite like spending $800,000 to gaze at another person's water through your kitchen glass, correct? Karen arrived from California, operating a white BMW with customized plates displaying real TR1 and an ego matching Texas in size. She embodied every expectation. Blonde highlights more expensive than my monthly food budget, a designer handbag likely costing more than my vehicle, and that type of manufactured smile indicating she'd never encountered a homeowner's assessment she wouldn't want to increase. Within half a year, she'd strategically positioned herself as HOA president and launched her mission to refine us simple rural residents. It commenced with passive-aggressive neighborly calls. She'd walk across my gravel driveway in stilettos, which, I must say, stilettos on gravel creates a sound like a tap dancer experiencing convulsions, carrying purchased cookies while remarking how my modest cabin possessed such personality. Her overpowering perfume would blend with the natural pine breeze like inexpensive air freshener at a memorial service. When I courteously refused her proposition to purchase my property for 60% below market value, her artificial smile transformed into something predatory. That polished facade slipped sufficiently to expose the scheming real estate predator beneath. The harassment began modestly, complaints to the county regarding my unpermitted dock. I presented them with permits from 2008, predating half her development. Subsequently, she alleged my trout were polluting the watershed. The environmental inspector literally chuckled and indicated my lake was purer than most city water systems. However, Karen had conducted her research. She uncovered some forgotten regulation from the 1920s concerning recreational water usage permits, the sort of bureaucratic relic that persists in dusty legal volumes like a legal parasite. During my municipal career, I'd witnessed how these inactive ordinances could be weaponized against landowners unfamiliar with their rights. She persuaded the county commissioners, conveniently her previous real estate customers, to modify it with retroactive effect. Abruptly, any lake activity within 500 feet of residential developments necessitated HOA authorization. My lake, which had been in existence for 70 years before her development was even a concept in some developer's imagination, now fell under Karen's jurisdiction. The woman who'd resided here for 18 months was attempting to control water that had belonged to my family for 3 generations. That's when she committed her initial significant mistake. She contacted law enforcement regarding a mourning widower simply attempting to recover in his own yard. Poor decision, Karen. Extremely poor decision. 14 days following the swimming citation, Karen appeared at my residence with backup. I was positioned on my porch, enjoying my morning coffee routine that maintained my sanity when I detected the sound of multiple vehicles on my gravel drive. Fresh pine scent mixed with something resembling bureaucratic desperation. That distinct smell of cheap cologne and perspiring polyester that accompanies small-time fraudsters. Karen exited her BMW, displaying a victorious smirk, accompanied by someone in a poorly fitted county inspector outfit. His identification read Randy Morrison, and he held a clipboard as though it were a legendary sword, and he the appointed monarch of trivial harassment. "Mr. Henderson," Karen declared with artificial sweetness, "we've received an undisclosed complaint regarding your commercial fishing business." I nearly spit out my coffee. "Commercial fishing? Ma'am, I stock this lake for personal enjoyment." Randy expanded his chest and struck his clipboard against his thigh, a nervous habit that would have been comical if he weren't attempting to intimidate me. "Sir, you'll need to present your business license for this aquaculture operation, or I'll be required to impose daily penalties of $500 until you reach compliance." Having dealt with sufficient corrupt inspectors during my municipal years, I recognized when someone was executing a scheme. Randy possessed that suspicious appearance of a car salesman attempting to sell you a vehicle without an engine. Nevertheless, I cooperated, retrieving my property documentation and fishing permits. "These are for personal purposes," I clarified patiently. "I stock approximately 50 trout twice annually for my own fishing activities." Randy scarcely examined the documentation. "Anonymous complaint indicates you're operating an unlicensed commercial enterprise. Until you demonstrate otherwise, this lake is closed down." That evening, while Karen likely celebrated with wine more expensive than most people's vehicles, I activated my old computer. 20 years of municipal work had instructed me that every bureaucrat creates a paper trail, and Randy Morrison was about to have his scrutinized under an extremely bright light. Initial finding: Randy's inspector qualifications had lapsed 2 years prior. The individual threatening me with daily penalties wasn't even legally permitted to inspect a children's lemonade stand, much less my property. I recalled a situation from my county experience where a fraudulent inspector had attempted similar tactics. The strategy was documenting everything before they understood they'd been exposed. That I captured screenshots of his expired license, submitted a formal complaint to the state licensing authority, and began investigating further. A comprehensive examination of public documents exposed that Randy had been performing inspections throughout 3 counties utilizing his expired qualifications. This wasn't merely incompetence, it was organized fraud. When the state board approached Randy about his unlicensed operations, he apparently experienced a total breakdown. Information circulates rapidly in small counties, and I learned through the courthouse network that he'd telephoned Karen in distress, pleading with her to resolve this situation somehow. Karen, demonstrating her strategic brilliance, concluded the optimal defense was aggressive offense. 3 days afterward, an official appearing invoice appeared in my postal box. The Lakeside Luxury Estates HOA was now imposing a liability insurance surcharge of $500 monthly for hazardous water activities. They'd backdated it to January. It was currently July, meaning I supposedly owed $3,000 that I had to respect the audacity. Karen was essentially charging me rental fees to swim in my personal lake that my grandfather had excavated with a borrowed bulldozer in 1952. While Randy confronted a $10,000 penalty and potential criminal charges for impersonating an inspector, I was investigating property law precedents. Years earlier, I'd examined a significant Supreme Court case regarding governmental overreach, Lucas versus South Carolina, where bureaucrats attempted to prohibit all development on someone's coastal land. The court determined that government cannot eliminate all economically beneficial property use without providing compensation. The principle was straightforward. They cannot compel you to pay charges for lawful activities on your personal land. Armed with this precedent, I submitted a preliminary injunction in county court to halt Karen's extortion. However, I also arranged for a surveyor to verify my property boundaries. Consider it intuition from handling shady individuals for 2 decades. The survey findings resembled Christmas morning and a lottery victory combined. Karen's precious development encroached 15 feet onto state forest property. 3 of the oversized homes, including one owned by her cousin Danny, were technically trespassing on public land that I submitted an anonymous tip to the state forestry agency. Sometimes the finest revenge involves simply adhering to regulations while observing your adversaries destroy themselves with their own actions. Within 1 week, 3 HOA houses received violation notifications for unauthorized land use. The potential penalties, $50,000 per building, plus removal expenses. Abruptly, Karen's trivial $3,000 invoice appeared like pocket change. The following morning, Karen stormed across my property boundary like Sherman marching through Georgia. Except Sherman likely possessed superior manners. Her face was sufficiently red to halt traffic, and she was yelling about harassment and destroying property values loud enough to frighten the loons from my lake and probably disturb the deceased in the adjacent county. "You believe you're so intelligent," she screamed, thrusting a manicured finger toward me. "I'm going to file a lawsuit against you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." I calmly provided her the court documents for my injunction hearing, still warm from printing. "I'll see you in court, Karen. Bring your financial resources and perhaps a competent attorney because you'll require both." Her mouth moved open and shut like one of my trout struggling for air. The sound of her heels withdrawing on gravel was sweeter than any loon melody. Karen evidently learned nothing from the Randy incident because 2 weeks later she determined to escalate to psychological combat. By psychological combat, I mean she contacted Channel 7 News. I was providing my trout their morning feeding. Yes, I maintained an actual feeding schedule. Don't criticize me. When I detected the rumble of a news vehicle approaching my driveway. The sound of gravel beneath those heavy wheels has a distinctive quality, like someone stepping on bubble wrap constructed of stones. Reporter Megan Torres emerged, accompanied by a cameraman who appeared he'd prefer covering literally anything else. Behind them, Karen exited her BMW wearing what I can only characterize as her concerned citizen outfit. Conservative jacket, subtle makeup, and an expression suggesting she was suppressing tears regarding the tragic situation of endangered property values. "Mr. Henderson," Megan called, approaching with that rehearsed reporter stride. "We're here regarding concerns that your lake operations are threatening the community's water source." I observed Karen, who was positioning herself strategically in the background with 3 neighbors she'd apparently enlisted as extras. Their faces displayed the kind of manufactured concern visible in pharmaceutical advertisements immediately before they enumerate the side effects. "Ma'am," I stated, placing down my fish food, "I'm uncertain what concerns you're mentioning." The questions began flowing rapidly. Was I conscious of the environmental hazards? Did I care about children's welfare? What about property values? Karen had clearly instructed Megan with loaded questions intended to portray me as some sort of ecological villain. However, here's the reality about spending 20 years in municipal meetings. You master remaining composed when people are attempting to make you appear negative on camera. I invited the crew to examine my lake water immediately on location. The expression on Karen's face when I submerged a transparent glass directly into the lake and consumed it while maintaining eye contact with the camera was invaluable, like witnessing someone realize they'd brought a water pistol to a tank battle. This water has been examined by County Environmental Services 3 occasions in the past year, I explained calmly, retrieving a folder thicker than a telephone directory. The lake is purer than most municipal sources. Would you like to review the reports? I handed Megan Torres copies of everything. Environmental inspection documents showing immaculate water quality, historical property documents proving my water rights extending back to 1892, county permits that were all current and legitimate, and photographs documenting Karen's development encroachment on state property. You could practically observe the narrative transforming in real time. Megan's questions became more pointed, more concentrated on why Karen would make allegations that didn't align with the documentation. Karen began perspiring despite the October breeze carrying the aroma of burning leaves from somewhere in the valley. "Mrs. Whitmore," Megan inquired, directing the camera toward Karen, "do you possess any evidence supporting your allegations about water pollution?" Karen's response was a demonstration in verbal acrobatics. She stammered about potential hazards and community concerns while her eye began twitching, a tell I'd learned to identify from numerous budget meetings with dishonest contractors. That's when I chose to share what I'd discovered about Karen's history. During my years examining municipal contracts, I established a network of contacts throughout several states. A few telephone calls had disclosed that Karen Whitmore wasn't precisely a newcomer to neighborhood devastation. "Megan," I said, "you might want to investigate Mrs. Whitmore's previous communities in California and Arizona. Intriguing patterns surface when you follow the documentation trail." Karen became pale beneath her foundation. She understood I'd completed my research. The interview concluded with Karen demanding equal opportunity to present the HOA viewpoint. Megan consented to a subsequent segment, which proved to be Karen's second significant error. While I prepared for the second round by collecting additional documentation, Karen apparently spent the week requesting favors. The station manager proved to be Jim Patterson, who'd collaborated with me on several municipal transparency projects back in my county days. Small world, particularly when you've established a reputation for honest accounting and exposing financial fraud. The subsequent broadcast aired the following Thursday. Megan Torres delivered a balanced piece displaying both properties, but Karen's performance was absolute comedic excellence. She contradicted herself numerous times, became defensive when posed simple questions, and inadvertently admitted she'd never actually examined the development's well water that she claimed to be protecting. Meanwhile, I delivered calm, evidence-based responses supported with documentation. The visual difference was remarkable. Karen appearing increasingly frantic while I sat there with folders full of evidence like some sort of bureaucratic champion. Community reaction was overwhelmingly favorable. My voicemail became full with neighbors expressing gratitude for confronting Karen's intimidation. Several mentioned they'd been frightened to speak previously, concerned about retaliation through HOA violations. However, Karen wasn't finished. Humiliated by the news coverage and confronting questions about her past, she decided to go extreme. The following Monday, I received a visit from the county health agency. Karen had submitted a complaint alleging my cabin's septic system was leaking into the lake, contaminating the watershed, and threatening public health. She demanded an immediate cessation on all lake activities pending a complete environmental investigation. The health inspector, a professional named Marcus who actually possessed expertise, arrived with proper qualifications and legitimate authority. I welcomed him with complete openness, even providing coffee while he performed his inspection. When Marcus uncovered that my cabin utilized a cutting-edge composting toilet system with zero sewage entering the lake, his reaction wasn't what Karen had anticipated. "This is actually an environmentally friendly demonstration," he informed me, capturing photographs of the system. "Do you mind if I obtain your contractor's details? I know several individuals who'd appreciate installing something similar." Karen's complaint was officially rejected as frivolous and vindictive, language that would demonstrate valuable in future legal procedures. The flavor of victory was pleasant, but I understood this was merely the beginning. Karen was escalating more rapidly than a rocket, and I had a sensation her next action would be even more desperate. If Karen possessed any remaining sense, she would have retreated after the septic system disaster. Instead, she intensified like a gambler with a mortgage payment due, holding pocket aces that transformed into a pair of twos. Friday afternoon, I was splitting firewood behind my cabin, the rhythmic sound of the axe helping me process Karen's escalating madness, when I detected the familiar sound of a delivery vehicle struggling up my gravel driveway. The postal worker appeared apologetic as he handed me a certified letter substantial enough to obstruct a horse's breathing. The return address made me smile. Rutherford and Associates, Charlotte's most costly legal firm. Karen had employed the type of attorneys who charged $600 hourly to compose strongly worded letters threatening legal action regarding parking disagreements. The cease and desist demanded I immediately halt all nuisance water activities that allegedly violated noise regulations. According to their creative interpretation of municipal law, my swimming generated excessive splashing sounds that disrupted the peaceful enjoyment of adjacent properties. They wanted $5,000 in mediation charges to prevent a complete lawsuit. I had to appreciate the creativity. Karen was literally attempting to penalize me for creating splash sounds while swimming in my personal lake. The woman had transformed petty tyranny into an artistic expression. However, the legal letter was merely the initial performance. Throughout the weekend, Karen organized what I can only describe as a surveillance operation. HOA members began driving past my property at 5-mile-per-hour speeds, capturing photos and videos of everything I performed. Someone placed passive-aggressive messages on my truck windshield regarding respecting community standards and being a considerate neighbor. The county suddenly became extremely interested in my property. Building inspector Monday, fire marshal Tuesday, tax assessor Wednesday. Each visit initiated by anonymous complaints about potential violations. The scent of bureaucratic harassment hung in the atmosphere thicker than morning fog over the lake. During my municipal career, I'd observed this approach previously: death by 1,000 paper cuts. The objective wasn't to discover actual violations. It was to exhaust me with constant harassment until I surrendered and relocated. Karen had apparently studied the manual on how to destroy property owners through legal attrition. However, Karen had committed a critical mistake. She'd initiated a conflict with someone who understood how to investigate public records and track money trails. That weekend, I dedicated 2 days in the basement of the county records facility, a location that smells like aged paper and shattered aspirations. What I uncovered was superior to Christmas morning. Karen's development had been constructed utilizing an emergency wetlands permit that mandated a 25-foot buffer zone from all natural water sources. 3 houses, including Karen's own oversized home, had been constructed within the buffer zone. The violations carried potential penalties of $10,000 daily with possible demolition orders if the environmental impact was sufficiently severe. However, that wasn't the optimal part. I also requested the HOA's financial statements under North Carolina's public records legislation, something any property owner within the association's jurisdiction can accomplish. What I discovered made Randy's fraudulent inspector credentials appear like a parking ticket. Karen had been treating the HOA treasury like her personal savings account. No competitive bidding for maintenance contracts, despite state legislation requiring it for expenditures exceeding $10,000. Her husband Rick's landscaping company possessed an exclusive $45,000 annual contract. Pool maintenance went to her cousin Danny for $28,000 annually. The legal fees category included payments to her personal attorney for matters completely unrelated to HOA operations. Years earlier, I'd worked on a situation involving a municipal official who'd utilized similar self-dealing schemes. The strategy was documenting the pattern and demonstrating deliberate intent to defraud. Karen had created a paper trail wider than Interstate 85. While I was constructing my case, Karen filed for a temporary restraining order against me. She alleged I was stalking and harassing HOA members and had threatened violence during our property boundary disagreement. The court hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning, with sheriff's deputies delivering papers while I was feeding my trout their evening meal. I employed Patricia, an attorney who specialized in HOA disagreements and possessed a reputation for consuming corrupt board members for breakfast. Patricia examined my documentation and smiled, the type of smile that makes opposing attorneys extremely nervous. "Garrett," she stated, spreading the evidence across her conference table, "Karen's about to discover why you don't bring a knife to a gunfight." The court hearing was absolute theater. Karen arrived with 3 HOA members as witnesses, all wearing their finest attire and rehearsing their concerned citizen expressions. I brought a folder of evidence that could have functioned as a boat anchor. Judge Margaret Yates, a straightforward woman with 30 years of experience handling frivolous lawsuits, examined the materials with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. Karen's witnesses contradicted each other under basic questioning, and my security camera footage clearly demonstrated who was performing the actual harassing. When Karen's attorney attempted to present evidence of my threatening conduct, Patricia produced audio recordings of every interaction. Karen's voice on the recordings sounded increasingly disturbed, while mine remained calm and professional throughout. Judge Yates dismissed Karen's restraining order request and issued a temporary protective order against Karen, commanding the HOA to cease surveillance and trespassing. She also granted me $2,500 in attorney charges and cautioned Karen about potential perjury charges for making false statements under oath. Karen's breakdown in the courthouse parking lot made local news. She yelled at the judge about the corrupt system and ranted about me destroying the community loud enough to wake the deceased in 3 counties. The newspaper reporter who observed the outburst composed a front-page article titled, "HOA President's Courtroom Tantrum." That evening, several development residents approached me privately. They disclosed Karen had been harassing them as well. Pool parties terminated for noise violations, garden decorations deemed architecturally unsuitable, parking violations for guests remaining more than 4 hours. Some residents were actually contemplating a recall petition to remove Karen from the board. However, while I was savoring this minor victory, Patricia had uncovered something in the original HOA charter that would alter everything. Concealed in the dense legal language was a clause I'd completely overlooked, one that would shift the power balance permanently. Any property owner within 1,000 feet of the development could petition to join the HOA as a voting member. My lake property not only qualified geographically, but as the largest individual parcel, I would control 30% of the voting shares. Karen had been so concentrated on harassing me, she'd never understood I could simply join her little kingdom and vote her out. The irony was delectable. In her desperation to control my property, Karen had handed me the keys to controlling hers. While Patricia was preparing for our subsequent legal action, she made a discovery that changed everything. She'd been examining the original development plat maps, those tedious technical documents that most people never bother reading, when she found something that made her telephone me at 6 in the morning. "Garrett, you need to arrive here immediately," she stated, her voice containing the type of excitement attorneys only experience when they find a smoking gun. Karen's entire development is constructed on a house of cards, and it's about to collapse. I drove to her office through the early morning mist rolling off my lake, the scent of damp pine needles mixing with anticipation. Patricia had coffee brewing and documents spread across her conference table like a detective solving a murder case. The revelation was stunning. Karen's development violated the original county master plan in ways that could shut down the entire development. The area had been designated for low-density rural residential development, meaning a maximum of 16 homes on the 95-acre parcel. Karen's 47 oversized homes exceeded the zoning density by over 300%. However, here's where it became interesting. The developer had circumvented this restriction through something called an emergency housing shortage provision, a loophole created after Hurricane Florence displaced thousands of families in 2019. Emergency variances allowed higher density development temporarily to address the housing crisis. The crucial word was temporarily, These emergency provisions expired after 5 years unless specifically renewed by the County Commission. Karen's development variance would expire on December 15th, just 6 months away. If the variance wasn't renewed, 31 houses would need to be demolished to meet the original zoning requirements. The remaining 16 homeowners would confront a financial catastrophe. Patricia retrieved the HOA financial projections on her computer. Current assessments are calculated assuming 47 paying units at $320 monthly, she explained. If 31 houses get demolished, the remaining residents would need to cover the same operating expenses with only 16 units. The mathematics was brutal. Monthly assessments would jump from $320 to $940 per house. Most residents had no awareness they were living in a financial time bomb. However, the real revelation was what Patricia found in Karen's correspondence files obtained through our discovery process. Karen had known about the expiration date throughout. She'd been secretly lobbying county commissioners for renewal, but her harassment campaign against me had backfired spectacularly. During my years in municipal finance, I'd collaborated with several current planning commission members on various projects. They remembered me as the individual who always followed proper procedures and caught financial irregularities before they became scandals. Commissioner Martinez had specifically mentioned that nice man with the lake as an example of responsible rural development. Karen's public breakdown and legal harassment had transformed potential allies into adversaries. Her chances of obtaining the variance renewed were somewhere between slim and non-existent. Patricia then showed me the original HOA charter documents, focusing on a section that made my coffee taste sweeter. The charter defined membership as all property owners within the community boundaries, which included a 100-foot buffer zone around the entire development. My property fell within that buffer zone by 23 feet. As a pre-existing property owner with legal standing, I had the right to join the HOA as a voting member. The charter specified that voting power was proportional to property size and assessed value. My 4-acre lakefront property was assessed at $485,000, while the average development home was assessed at $225,000. Under proportional voting rules, I would control 31% of all HOA decisions. If you join the HOA, Patricia explained, you can block any assessment increases, call special elections for board positions, access all financial records without jumping through public records obstacles, and propose charter amendments with your voting block. The irony was perfect. Karen had spent months attempting to control my property through HOA regulations. Now I could join her HOA and control her. However, as I sat there examining the legal documents, I understood something important. I didn't want to destroy this community. Many residents were victims of Karen's schemes, just like me. The real solution wasn't revenge. It was removing the cancer and healing the patient. That my objective shifted from payback to community restoration. Remove Karen, fix the financial problems, create a sustainable HOA that actually served its residents instead of feeding one person's power addiction. Karen, meanwhile, had somehow learned that information about the zoning expiration was leaking. She'd called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Saturday, claiming urgent financial matters required immediate attention. The meeting notice went out with minimal advance warning. A classic suppression tactic to limit attendance. I had 72 hours to file my HOA membership application and gather support from dissatisfied residents. Saturday morning would become the showdown for control of the community's future. Patricia worked through the weekend preparing legal documents while I reached out to residents who'd approached me after the courthouse victory. The competition was on, and the winner would control not just the HOA, but the financial survival of 47 families. The flavor of justice was within reach, but it would require perfect execution and a little assistance from neighbors who were tired of living under Karen's reign of petty terror. Saturday morning couldn't arrive fast enough, but I had 3 days to build an alliance that could dismantle Karen's empire of petty tyranny. The scent of fresh coffee and determination filled my cabin as Patricia and I mapped out our strategy, like generals planning a major military operation. First priority, recruit Janet Morrison, the retired teacher who lived on Maple Court and had been documenting Karen's overreach for 2 years. Janet had that quiet strength you find in educators who've dealt with difficult parents and budget cuts. Karen had penalized her $200 for installing a non-conforming bird bath. Apparently, Concrete doves violated the architectural covenant's vision of suburban paradise. When I called Janet, her voice carried 20 years of suppressed frustration. "Mr. Henderson, I've been waiting for someone to stand up to that woman. What do you need?" Janet's spiral notebook contained 2 years' worth of violations, fines, and harassment incidents organized with the precision of a teacher's grade book. She documented everything from Karen's surprise inspections to the HOA board meetings where dissenting voices were systematically ignored. Next was Bob Martinez, an accountant who lived on Oak Ridge Drive and had the misfortune of asking questions about HOA finances. Bob was the type of numbers person who noticed when spending didn't add up, a dangerous trait in Karen's world of creative accounting. "I've been attempting to review actual invoices for months," Bob explained when we met at the local diner, the scent of bacon grease and honest conversation filling the atmosphere. "Karen claims everything's proprietary information, but I found $43,000 in unexplained expenses just in this year's budget." Bob's spreadsheet showed a pattern of financial irregularities that would make any auditor's heart race. Landscaping bills that didn't match the actual work performed, equipment purchases with no delivery records, legal fees for services that had nothing to do with HOA business. Our third ally was Lisa Park, a civil engineer who originally designed the development's drainage system before Karen modified the plans without proper permits. Lisa had that practical intelligence of someone who builds things that have to work in the real world. "Karen changed my drainage specifications to save money," Lisa explained during our strategy meeting at my cabin. "Now her modifications dump runoff directly toward your lake. The violations could shut down the entire development if the state environmental agency gets involved." Lisa brought technical expertise and professional credibility, exactly what we'd need to counter Karen's emotional manipulation tactics. Friday evening, we held our final strategy session around my kitchen table. Patricia had prepared 3 folders of evidence, each organized for maximum impact. The plan was surgical: expose Karen's financial fraud, reveal the zoning time bomb, and present my membership application as the solution to both problems. Bob would handle the financial presentation using simple charts that any homeowner could understand. $45,000 to Rick's landscaping company for work valued at $18,000. $28,000 for pool maintenance that was actually performed weekly instead of the contracted daily service. Legal fees. That included Karen's personal divorce attorney paid with community funds. Janet would read testimonials from harassed residents showing the human cost of Karen's power addiction. Lisa would explain the infrastructure violations and environmental risks that Karen had hidden from the community. During my municipal years, I'd learned that people respond to stories more than statistics. We needed residents to see Karen as the problem, not just a symptom of bad governance. Every violation, every fine, every act of harassment was part of a pattern designed to consolidate power and extract money from the community. Patricia reviewed the legal procedures we'd need to follow. North Carolina HOA law required that emergency board elections could be called by any member presenting evidence of financial mismanagement. My membership application would give me standing to make such a motion, and my 31% voting share would make it impossible for Karen's supporters to block. The backup plan was equally important. If Karen tried to end the meeting early, Patricia would cite specific bylaw requirements for addressing member concerns. If Karen claimed I couldn't speak as a non-member, my application gave me immediate standing. If she called police, all our documentation was legally obtained and we'd be on public property. Saturday morning arrived with the type of crisp October air that makes everything feel possible. We met at my cabin at 7 a.m., 3 hours before the scheduled HOA meeting. The scent of bacon and coffee mixed with nervous energy as we reviewed our final preparations. Janet was nervous but determined. Someone has to stop her before she destroys this community completely. Bob was excited about finally exposing the financial fraud. Numbers don't lie, and Karen's numbers have been lying for 3 years. Lisa brought maps and technical drawings that would make Karen's infrastructure violations impossible to ignore. When residents see how much money she's wasted on shortcuts, they'll understand why their fees keep increasing. I felt calmer than I had in months. After years of reactive defense against Karen's attacks, we were finally going on offense with overwhelming evidence and legal authority. Patricia distributed copies of all our documents and reminded everyone about Karen's likely tactics. We should expect personal attacks, false accusations, and emotional manipulation. The key is staying focused on facts and letting Karen's behavior speak for itself. At 9:30, we loaded our evidence into Bob's van and drove to the community center. The flavor of anticipation was sweet, mixed with the satisfaction of knowing we'd done our homework thoroughly. Karen's reign of petty terror was about to end, and justice would be served with a side of proper financial documentation. The only question was whether Karen would go quietly or take the entire development down with her in a blaze of narcissistic fury. The week leading up to our showdown, Karen went completely off the rails. Like a cornered animal with a law degree and access to social media, she launched what I can only describe as a scorched earth campaign designed to destroy my reputation before I could destroy hers. It started Friday night with threatening texts to Janet. Spreading lies about HOA business is grounds for a defamation lawsuit, Karen wrote at 11:47 p.m. Apparently, insomnia and desperation make great companions.